Well, good morning, everybody. This is Saturday morning, and it's nice and sun shining out. It's supposed to be up to 65 today, so it's gonna be a nice day. So nice weekend. So today we're looking at episode 23, and this will be our second episode concentrating on the Doppelgangers and Lee Harvey Oswald. And today's topic, I don't think you can overstate the importance of it. I don't think you can talk about it enough because I think it's the key to unlocking the entire plot to frame Lee Harvey Oswald. And so we'll get into that in just a second. Um, if you recall, if you did watch yesterday's episode 22, we talked about some of the early occurrences of clear doppelganger activity, starting with J. Edgar Hoover back in 1960, saying someone's using his information, and we know it's not him because he's in Russia, and someone down in New Orleans is using his information. And then we talked about the Bolton Ford incident and showed you some of the receipts and paperwork relating to that, where somebody claiming to be Lee Harvey Oswald signing his name on an invoice. And of course, couldn't be him because, again, he is in Russia at the time trying to buy 10 trucks for an anti-Castro organization. And then we talked, the third one was about the Sylvia Audio story. We got a little bit more in depth than that, and how the people that were with him, Angel and Leopoldo, especially Leopoldo, went to great lengths to identify this Leon Oswald, this gringo, for Sylvia, so much so that she would remember his name and face by introducing him and on the steps of her apartment, but then also calling either the day after or 2 days after, and going on this long diatribe about how crazy Oswald was and how he thinks the Cubans were weak for not assassinating him. He just said it would be easy to assassinate him, and he furthered up with Oswald's training in the military as a sharpshooter. I mean, he just talk about Hansel and Gretel and the breadcrumb trail. Uh, and of course, that was all. And then he also added in another details. He kept saying, "We're about ready to go on a trip. We're about ready to go on a trip." He just kept adding that in, like he wanted her to remember certain details about Lee Harvey Oswald, about his background, about how crazy he was, about his excellence with a gun, and about how they're all getting ready to go on a trip. He just kept repeating it and repeating it. So today we're going to be looking at the question, was Mexico City, of course, this is the trip that Leopoldo was talking about, was that just an elaborate disinformation campaign to frame Oswald? And this is Doppelgangers Part 2. Pictured here on the left is a man named David Atley Phillips. Of course, the picture on the right is his actual photo. The drawing on the left is of a man identified as Maurice Bishop. And this became a real mystery, especially to the House Select Committee in the late 70s, because in the days before the assassination in Dallas, the man on the left who identified himself as Maurice Bishop was seen with Lee Harvey Oswald. Witnesses put them together talking, and it was discovered by Gaten Fonzie, the investigator for the House Select Committee, that Maurice Bishop was the alias or code name, whatever you want to call it, for David Atley Phillips. So this is huge, especially when you consider what David Atley Phillips' job was in the CIA. He had risen through the ranks and become, because of his expertise with disinformation, he became the disinformation chief. If they needed a story concocted, this was the guy who did it for them. He was based out of Mexico City, ironically, and he rose to the level of he was in charge of the CIA station chief, in charge of the entire Western Hemisphere. So he is very high up in the hierarchy of the CIA, and his expertise is disinformation. And in the days prior to the JFK assassination, he was spotted by several witnesses, not just one, talking with Lee Harvey Oswald. And so everything we're about ready to talk about came from this man. And we've already quoted him once after the story falls apart about Mexico City. He's the one that came out and said, no, I don't think he was in Mexico City. I don't think there's any evidence to support it. He never went to the Soviet embassy. And he just disavowed the entire story because it was just falling apart around him. And it was becoming more of a liability than an asset at that point. And of course, when we get to this part, and I'm allowed to go on and speculate as to why I think he actually was in Mexico City, but the CIA didn't want people to know the real reason, I think it'll all make sense. But anyway, at this point, before the assassination takes place, this guy's job to put together a story that can be dumped into the cover story that proves that Oswald was the guy. And so I think it's interesting to see the links to which it's more than interesting. I think it's instructive to see the links to which our intelligence agency, the CIA, will go to frame somebody. And so the story, according to the CIA, begins on September 27th, and it runs through October 2 of 1963. So about a month and a half before the assassination. According to the CIA, Oswald went to Mexico City. And why the Sylvia Duran story becomes a problem in the lead up to this is because he had to get there somehow. And according to them, he left New Orleans on the 25th of September, going on a bus to the border and then across the border. And on the 27th, he actually arrives in Mexico City. So the story of Sylvia Duran butts into the story of the bus and his trip to Mexico City. So you got a problem there. This is the trip Leopoldo keeps referring to. He said it over and over again. And according to the CIA, who said that they had photographic evidence and voice recordings to back up their story. We'll get to that in a minute. That while he was in Mexico City, he visited both the Cuban and the Soviet embassies in Mexico City. So the top picture is the Cuban embassy, the bottom picture is the Soviet embassy in Mexico City. And the agency had set up video cameras across the street from both of these places and this is just a matter, it was a routine issue. They always did this. They record or videotape anybody coming and going from these embassies. And so they said they had pictures of him entering and exiting both of these places. They would also wiretap the phones to both embassies. And so they have, if he had used the phone during any one of these visits, they would have voice recordings of his phone conversations. This is a woman named Sylvia Duran, and Sylvia factors in prominently in this whole episode because she is the Cuban consulate employee, and I'm assuming she was probably at the front desk or in the front lobby because this is the person that Oswald interacted with the most at the Cuban embassy. Her name is Sylvia Duran. She said, according to her, she spoke with him 3 different times on the same day, September 27th. And she was a little bit suspicious of this guy coming in claiming to be Oswald because he was just dumping stuff on her desk. He wanted to show her all of his credentials that should make it easy for him to get to Cuba. He showed her his membership card to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. He showed her his I guess he had a card to the American Communist Party. He showed her old Soviet documents and clippings of his arrest in New Orleans when he was out leafleting pro-Castro literature. But he's just dumping all this stuff on her saying, look, 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 look. and that's all well and good, but she's obviously got protocol she has to follow. And so she tells him, listen, if you are going to get permission, or if you want to visit the Soviet Union, or if you want to get a transit visa to Cuba, there's some steps you have to follow. She said, first, you need to go to the Soviet embassy and get permission from them. And then secondly, I need an official visa photo before I can start processing any of your requests to get a visa to go to Cuba. And she said when Oswald left, he wasn't happy. I guess he was hoping just by dumping all this stuff on her, she'd foreclose on all the normal steps and just bypass everything and give him what he wanted. Anyway, he leaves and he's in a huff. So then he returns an hour later, and now he's got the visa photos. So this is his second visit. And so he gives her the visa photos. So now she can begin working on the Cuban part of this the situation. And she thanks him for the photos, etc., and tells him, okay, you still need permission from the Soviet consulate, etc. So when he leaves, and ostensibly to go to the Soviet embassy to get that permission. When he returns a third time, he tells her this time that the Soviet consulate has promised him a Soviet visa. He just tells her, yeah, they said yes. As a teacher, I can't tell you how many times I've had students come to me and say, Miss Johnson said, or Mr. Smith said, and you find out it's not true. So he's acting like a high school student here. Duran, who is obligated to do this to confirm his story, not trusting him completely, a little suspicious of this guy, telephones the Soviet embassy, and they don't even know who he is. And certainly haven't made any promises to him about a visa or a visa. And so now she knows the man is lying to her. Okay. So she confronts him and he gets mad. He flies into a rage and she has to call for backup, basically. And a man named Eusebio Ascu, who is a fellow Cuban consul, has to take him by the arm and escort him to the door. So this man claiming to be Lee Harvey Oswald has certainly made an impression with Sylvia Duran at this point. Let's see if I can move my face out of the way here. I'm going to reduce the size of it just a tad. There we go. And now we get to the story of Colonel Oleg Maximovich Necheparenko. I hope I said that right. And of course, he wrote a book about this whole interaction, as you can see here on the right. And he's a vice consul at the Soviet embassy. And according to Necheparenko, Oswald visited the Soviet embassy twice. So now we know, according to two witnesses, Duran says he visited the Cuban embassy 3 times, and Necheparenko says he visited the Soviet embassy twice. And of course, he's seeking the same thing from both. He wants visas. On September 22nd, Necheparenko said that he told Oswald, he's kind of following the same template or the same protocols as Duran. He says, hey, you can't get what you're asking for today. It's going to take 4 months. Okay, we're going to do research on you. We're going to look into your background. We're going to find out who you are. And Oswald shouts at him, this won't do for me. This is not my case. For me, it's all going to end in tragedy. That's just an interesting thing to say. And so Necheparenko escorts Oswald to the door. So this guy, claiming to be Oswald, has now been escorted out of both embassies. He's made a scene in both embassies. He has lied to the Cuban consul. He has dumped all these documents on her. She's very suspicious of him. Now she knows he's lying. And as far as Necheparenko is concerned, he is saying strange things like it's all going to end in tragedy. And this is only a month and a half before the assassination. So following up on the second visit on the 28th, he meets with Valerie Kostikov. That name should sound familiar if you've watched earlier episodes, and a man named Pavel Yaskov. These are both Soviet consuls. One of them, Valerie Kostikov, has a little bit more, his background is a little bit more interesting. We'll get to him in just a second. So they meet him at the door. He's already been escorted to the door by Necheparenko. Now he comes in and they reaffirm or they, corroborate Necheparenko's story. It's just going to take 4 months, buddy. Okay? 4 months. So just chill out. Oswald becomes agitated again. He takes a revolver from his jacket pocket and he sets it on the table. And he says, quote, see, this is what I must now carry to protect my life. And evidently, in the course of these conversations that he's having with the Cuban consul or the Soviet consuls, he's been complaining that the FBI has been surveilling and persecuting him, which is interesting. This is not the kind of stuff you say if you're trying to get a passport to another country, to say, well, my own country is persecuting me and the FBI is after me. That's not going to help your cause. So here comes Nechepurenko again. He escorts him to the door again. Things are not going well for this man claiming to be Oswald. Let's talk about Valerie Kasakov a little bit here. Because the CIA is going to make a big deal about this conversation with Valerie Kostikov. So we need to know a little bit about him so we understand what the CIA's angle here is. Of course, the agency claims it has all these recordings and it has transcripts of a phone call and it has pictures, et cetera, et cetera. And they say that the American male who was posing, and of course, they want the American people to believe at this point when they're dumping the story on the American people, that this is the real Oswald. And they're saying that the American male spoke in broken Russian. And that he had been at the embassy on the 28th, during which he spoke with a consul named Valerie Vladimirovich Kostikov. Well, Kostikov is going to ring, that name is going to cause alarm. And it's going to cause suspicion because he's well known to the CIA and to the FBI. He's a KGB agent in Mexico City, and he was in charge of Division 13. And that division for the KGB was specifically charged with the responsibility of terrorism, sabotage, and assassination. So this is a murky individual. And when they say, well, he met with and he spoke with this consul named Valerie Kostikov, if you see the stories from that era when this story first dumps, and they always talk about Kostikov being an assassination expert. He's an assassination expert. This guy's in charge of Soviet assassinations, KGB official who's in charge of assassinations. Just repeat it. And it's like, it's like advertising. Subliminal message is that if Oswald met with this guy, they were plotting, they were hatching a plan, because clearly Oswald comes back to the United States, to Dallas, and assassinates our president a month and a half later after talking to Valerie Kostikov. We don't see any time prior in Oswald's life where he was related to any kind of assassination plot. It's like this guy put the idea in his head, and a month and a half later he did it, and he falls back on his training as a sharpshooter and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, he was referred to many times as the most dangerous KGB terrorist assigned to the Western Hemisphere. So the CIA is saying, this guy, he is, he's like the Osama bin Laden of 1963. And if you meet with this guy, you're up to no good. If you meet with this guy, it proves you are one of him, or he is using you as an asset to achieve his aim, which is to assassinate the American president. I'll let you draw your own conclusions. But anyway, this is one of the reasons why they dumped this story. And of course, we just saw that according to witnesses, he did speak with Oswald, but it was a matter of routine. He was following up, reaffirming what Nechepurenko had said. It's going to take 4 months for you to get this visa, Mr. Oswald. And from that, the conversation was inferred that he was meeting with Kostikov. They didn't just walk in the Soviet embassy and happen upon him and get told that it was going to take 4 months for him to get this visa. He met with him. He went in, he had a meeting arranged in advance and went into his office, and they closed the door and they had this big meeting. That's not what happened. Anyway, that's what the CIA is saying happened, or inferring happened. Okay, so there's some obvious problems with this. First of all, the real Oswald spoke fluent Russian, and there's all kinds of testimony to back that up. When he spoke with the KGB, when he went to Russia, he spoke in Russian. When he spoke with his interest guide in Russia, he spoke in Russian. All of his communication in Russia with the Russians was in Russian. In fact, Marina Oswald said when she met him, he spoke such fluent Russian, she thought he was Russian. He didn't speak in broken Russian at all. So that's a problem. After he was arrested, for the assassination, the alleged assassination, and interrogated. The FBI listened to the recordings that the CIA gave him, saying this was our guy, this was Oswald meeting in Mexico City a month and a half ago. And they're like, no, it ain't. That's not him. That's not his voice. And of course, J. Edgar Hoover backs this up in a memo. Says 7 of our agents who interrogated him and had intimate knowledge of his voice listened to the tapes, and all 7 were unanimous. This wasn't his voice. It's not him. And so later, when the Warren Commission asked the CIA, why don't you provide those recordings you say are him, let us listen to them, they said the tapes had been, quote, routinely destroyed and only the typed transcripts remained. I mean, this is patently ridiculous. Here we are. This is the biggest case, the crime of the century, and the Warren Commission is trying to investigate this, and you're routinely destroying evidence in this case. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, but it fits a pattern. Every time there's evidence that's incriminating, not every time, I should amend my statement, but a lot of times when there's evidence that is incriminating to Oswald, and it's announced with a lot of fanfare up front, when the evidence is actually requested, give us that evidence you said you had, it disappears. If you remember in Dallas, right? The wallet that they said, the cops said they found on the ground next to J.D. Tippett's body, wallet just disappeared along with the 2 IDs, just disappeared. The bullets that they said they found from allegedly Oswald's 38 next to J.D. Tippett's body, when they were asked to be produced, evidently they couldn't produce them because the Warren Commission put in its exhibit 4 bullets that didn't have the officer's initials on. And the gun, the original gun that they found on the 6th floor, the German Mauser, that disappears, and substituted in its place all of a sudden is a Mannlicher Carcano. I could go on and on, but here we go again. Tape recordings disappear. That's not all. When the images were produced, and we've talked about this prior, I can just see it's like a student bringing me his homework, and it's very clear he didn't do the work, and he's standing there, and I'm asking him, this has happened. It's clear he copy and pasted this entire assignment. And I mean, oh, this is interesting, Johnny. Look at this word that you just used. Can you tell me what this word means? I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking at that moment, but I'm sure I have a reason for using that word. So, here's the CIA providing a picture, several pictures actually, of Oswald. It is clear to everybody that's not Oswald. What are you trying to say? What are you trying to prove here? The CIA description of the man claiming to be Oswald was, this guy was actually a 35-year-old 6-foot male, reasonably athletic build with a receding hairline and a balding top. Okay. Oswald was only 24 years old. He was 5'10". He's skinny. Everybody knows how skinny he was. 165 pounds. Okay. And he had light brown, wavy hair. This is not the same guy. And the CIA is trying to dump this story on the American people, proving that it was. I want to return briefly to the Sylvia Duran story. The CIA was really convinced she was the key to proving that story. And so they let it be known to the Mexican police, you need to arrest her and get a confession on her that this man was Lee Harvey Oswald, and that he, this is our guy. They wanted a firm identification, because the problem that she's become is that she met with this guy. This is the guy she met with, and who claimed to be Oswald. So all of her story is based on what this guy did. And then when they give her the picture of Oswald, or she sees the picture of Oswald, she's like, that ain't him. That's not him. And she would be in a position to know, because allegedly she slept with him. And I'm not going to go down that rat trail, but allegedly she slept with the man and had a little bit of an intimate relationship with him. And so, acting on the CIA's instructions, they arrested Sylvia Duran, and they literally tortured her, trying to get her to say that this man was really the same guy as Oswald, that he was the real Oswald. And she wouldn't budge from her story. Give her credit. So that became a problem. Then you remember the FBI went to Fenella Farrington in Washington, D.C. and said, hey, we need you to corroborate that you know Lee Harvey Oswald. Here's a picture of you talking with him in New Orleans. So, and we know you went to Mexico, and so we need you to corroborate that you met with Oswald in Mexico, and that's why you're meeting with him in New Orleans, because you have a prior relationship with him. You know him, and you can vouch that he was in Mexico City because you same time you were there and you met with him. And she's like, no, I don't know this man. You've got a picture in your hand that shows me talking to him in New Orleans. That doesn't prove that I know him. I talked to a lot of people in New Orleans when I was trying to get my car back from Mexico City. But I didn't meet with him in Mexico City, and I don't know. So you see here the intelligence agencies trying desperately to make this story stick. This is the story that David Atley Phillips came up with. It, in the absence of any real evidence, it looked like a slam dunk. They had their man, they had voice recordings, they had pictures, they had testimony from people who said they met with a guy named Lee Harvey Oswald. Boy, it looked really incriminating. They dumped it on there, and the cover story out, it comes out days and weeks after the assassination. But then when you start examining, the story just starts falling apart. It doesn't hold. And that's why David Atley Phillips later will disavow it, because he realized, oh, this is bad. This makes us look like we're making up evidence. We are, at the very minimum, tampering with evidence, but really looks like we're planting evidence. So we got to just disavow the whole thing. So, oh, my bad. And it's not just the CIA; it's the FBI too. So, going back to my original question, was Mexico City just a disinformation campaign to frame Oswald? Well, clearly, clearly it is. This is another picture of the guy they say is Oswald. There you see the balding spot in the back of his head. There you see his physical frame, much clearer image there, and you can see he's much bigger than the real Lee Harvey Oswald. This is another picture of him coming out, or coming to or coming out of one of those embassies. And here's J. Edgar Hoover on November 23. Okay, this is how fast the story falls apart. I said days and weeks. I was wrong. It wasn't days and weeks. It was the next day. The next day, this story's already fallen apart. J. Edgar Hoover is briefing LBJ on the Mexico City. LBJ even understood the importance of this. He asked him specifically, what about this Mexico City thing? Because it looked bad for Oswald initially. He kept asking about it. So J. Edgar Hoover came back and said, okay, well, we have, this is a direct quote, we have the tape and the photograph of the man who was at the Soviet embassy using Oswald's name. The tape and the photograph of the man who was at the Soviet embassy do not correspond to this man's, talking about Oswald's voice, nor to his appearance. And this is J. Edgar Hoover in government speak telling LBJ the CIA is full of shit. This story is just bullshit. Okay, he didn't say it in so many words, but that's what he's saying. This is total bullshit. And of course, all of this Mexico City evidence had been supplied by the CIA, which tells you a lot. It tells you a lot about the premeditation of this whole thing. This was arranged in advance. All of this was prepared in advance to drop when they needed it, which was the day of the assassination, to add to all the other evidence that was piling up, and to make it a slam dunk case. And then when you find out the FBI went behind it and tried to help the story along with its interaction with Fidel Farrington, you realize that the FBI, though they know the story's bullshit. They know it. This J. Edgar Hoover quote proves it. They're still trying to prove that it's true later with the Fidel Farrington story. So you have multiple layers of complicity here. You have the CIA trying to create evidence and frame who they want framed for the assassination. And then you have the FBI, who, after investigating this evidence, realize it's total bunk, and they are going to go along with the story anyway, which basically is going to be part of my theory about this whole thing, is that the CIA was behind the assassination. The FBI knew it was going to happen in advance, let it happen, and then tried to arrange all the evidence that they gave the Warren Commission to fit the narrative. So they were both complicit, one before, during, and after, the other also before, during, and after, in their own different various ways. So that goes to the question that I asked at the beginning. Was the Mexico City story, the saga of Mexico City, just a giant disinformation campaign? Yes, it was. It started with David Atley Phillips, and then eventually ends with David Atley Phillips when he has to disavow his own work because the story didn't stick. It didn't hold. It didn't pass muster. And so I started off today saying I don't believe I could ever overstate the importance of this episode, or of this question, and this saga about Mexico City, because it points all 10 fingers at the CIA for planning this whole thing. For what motive would they have to pin all the blame on this guy, Lee Harvey Oswald, unless they're trying to deflect or divert attention away from somebody else? And if they're involved in this diversion story, it's because they know who's actually doing it. I would submit, not only do they know, they're responsible for it. And then, of course, the FBI is crooked as can be, trying to back up the CIA and this cock and bull story. So, and of course, in the aftermath of the assassination, American people are distraught about their president being killed, and all of the hubbub of the funeral. And then 2 days later, Lee Harvey Oswald himself gets killed. And I mean, you can understand why the American people are confused. What is going on? And then they hear all this evidence. It's reported in the media, and the media is very friendly to the intelligence agencies. They're printing whatever they're told. And it just looks like, well, I guess Oswald did it. He got what was coming to him. But in the time afterwards, if there had been a trial, all of this would have come out. I mean, clearly, because on the day after the assassination, J. Edgar Hoover already knows this Mexico City story is not true. So this would have come out in trial, which is why Oswald couldn't live for there to be a trial. And I go back to what I've said several times before. A cover story doesn't have to be proven in a court of law. It's the court of public opinion. And that's all. And in the absence of a court trial where Oswald tried to, the only defense Oswald could put up for himself was that little statement he made in the hallway of the Dallas police headquarters, "I'm just a patsy." And every piece of evidence that is coming out subsequent is backing up his story, not theirs. It's backing up his story. So anyway, that's the Mexico City saga. And of course, this is the continuation of the Doppelgangers. This doppelganger went to considerable length to get noticed. Just like Leopoldo wanted Sylvia to remember this man Oswald, and that they're taking a trip, and that he'd been in the Marines and was trained as a sharpshooter, and he wanted to assassinate the president. All these things. Well, this man wanted the Soviet consul and the Cuban consul to remember him, remember his name, remember all this document stuff that I've given you, proving that I'm pro-Castro, I'm pro-Cuban, wanting, acting irrationally, flying off the handle, losing his cool, having me escorted here, talking about the FBI following, a little bit paranoid, slapping a gun on the desk. This guy's got a gun. They're trying too hard. They're trying too hard. When they're trying too hard, it's because the story ain't real. And so they keep adding more little pieces to it, trying to make it more and more convincing. It's actually doing the opposite. It's patently ridiculous. The entire thing from start to finish. Patently ridiculous. Okay, that is episode 23. Feel free to check out my website. As if you've checked out my website already, you know that I offer curriculum for homeschool students and all the histories, high school, US, world, government, also the JFK assassination. If you just want to get content, teach yourself, that's fine. I also offer online instruction. You can buy me and I'll be your teacher. We can do it that way. I've got books and blogs and podcasts and things on the website, so feel free to check that out. Also, feel free to subscribe to my channel. Many of you have done that so far. Appreciate it. It's free. It's no obligation. Click the notification bell to get notified when I drop new content, and then give me a heads up, thumbs up, not heads up, thumbs up. And until next time, I hope everybody has a great weekend. Thank you.